Hello. Hi everyone, we're about to get started. Alright, good evening, welcome to Prairie Lights. My name is Sarah Ann, and tonight I'm pleased to present New York Times bestselling author Xochitl Gonzalez, who will read from her new book, Anita de Monte Laughs Last. She will be joined in conversation with author Kevin Brockmeier. Tonight's event is a very Iowa City event. Both Xochitl and Kevin are alumni of the Iowa Writers Workshop and have lived here in Iowa City. And the artist, whom the main character of this book of fiction is based on, also lived in Iowa City. Anita de Monte Laughs Last was on most anticipated book of 2024 lists from LitHub, The Millions, The New York Times, Today.com, Time, The Washington Post, Refinery 29, Marie Claire, Real Simple, Entertainment Weekly, LA Daily News, Hip Latina, Book Riot, and Kirkus. Yeah. Great. Today.com calls Anita de Monte a new captivating novel that explores othering, erasure, power, and legacy through the lens of two women of color navigating the art scene years apart. NPR says the novel is the best, most elusive combination, a thought-provoking and brilliantly entertaining triumph. The Washington Post says, Anita de Monte Laughs Last is a cry for justice. Writing with urgency and rage, Gonzalez speaks up for those who have been othered and deemed unworthy, robbed of their legacy. Kevin Brockmeier is the author of the memoir A Few Seconds of Radiant film strip, the novels Illumination, The Brief History of the Dead, and The Truth About Celia, the story collections The Ghost Variations, Things That Fall from the Sky, and The View from the Seventh Layer, and the children's novels City of Names and Grooves, A Kind of Mystery. His work has been translated into 17 languages. He is teaching this semester at the Iowa Writers Workshop and otherwise lives in Little Rock, Arkansas, where he was raised. Xochitl Gonzalez is the New York Times bestselling author of the previous novel Olga Dies Dreaming, which we have some copies here. Named a best book of 2022 by the New York Times, Time, Kirkus, Washington Post, NPR. Her nonfiction work has been published in Elle Decor, Allure, Vogue, Real Simple, and The Cut. Her commentary writing for The Atlantic was recognized as a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. A native Brooklynite and proud public school graduate, Gonzalez holds a BA from Brown University and lives in her hometown of Brooklyn with her dog, Hector Lobo. We are very glad to have her here tonight. Please welcome both of our authors.
My dog is also from Iowa. I just thought I would mention that. Thank you for coming, and I'm very indebted to Iowa for this book. It was inspired in part by the life of Anita, who I discovered in my senior year of college at Brown, but then kind of became newly enamored with when I found myself in Iowa City, where she had gone and gotten her MFA. And then really I took Sam Chang's novel workshop, so I'm indebted to her for the rest of my life. But Kevin Brockmeier, I don't think I would have been able to write this book the way that I wrote this book because of it, so I'm actually really grateful. So the book follows the story of two women, one inspired by Anita, but she kind of has become a little bit, I don't know, something otherworldly to me, Anita de Monte. And Anita is an artist in the 80s before she mysteriously dies. And most of the book is narrated, her parts of the book are narrated from her afterlife. And so it starts out with her at an art party. And to just lay the groundwork, I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning, and then I'm going to introduce you to the other character that we kind of follow. So Anita in 1985. In New York City. If it weren't for what happened later, everyone would have forgotten that night entirely. It wasn't like the 70s, you know? Nights when you never knew what could happen, what to expect. No, by 1985, the parties in New York were all the same. One night, one party bleeding into the next. Nothing specific or momentous enough to press itself into your memory. The guests, the conversations, the taste of the fucking wine on your lips, all more or less the same. Especially Tilly's parties. Formulaic, interchangeable. Some felt that's what made them work, but for me, it depressed me. That impossible distinction of the passage of time. The drinks were always set in her claustrophobic galley kitchen to force intimacy. The food, what little there was, Wast hate feeding people, set atop the piano in the center of her massive loft. The poor young artist hovering whilst it lasted. The music just loud enough to soften silences, but too muted to inspire true revelry. Over the years, Philip Glass was replaced with Sun Ra, the hot new artist aging into establishment figures or disappearing altogether, replaced by other younger faces. All the big museum people were always invited, naturally. Tilly enjoyed the thirst shared between those two groups in particular, the haves dangling their opportunities tantalizingly before the have-nots. It created a great friction in the room, she'd remarked once. After years where I was the only brown speck in attendance, lately there'd been a noted effort to populate the guest list with more third-world artists, the sudden concern for diversity coinciding with the Met hiring their first black senior curator. I'm not being cynical, just honest. It would have been embarrassing to invite Rory to a party and have her see only white people there. But outside of that, in all the years of all these fetes, very little had changed. Except, I suppose, for me. If you were in New York and in the art world, you did not refuse an invitation from Tilly Barber. And for whatever reason, that night was particularly crowded. Bodies and conversations packed close enough to create a hum. I remember feeling a restless excitement when I arrived. The kind you feel when you're giddy from holding a secret, one with wings that flap furiously against your palms, knowing that any moment now it could fly up, out into the world, its motion changing fortunes and futures, oceans or even lifetimes away, and I, the one containing it. Such a power. Giancarlo, raconteur that he was telling me a story. I was listening but not. He always came back from Rome with the longest stories. I was distracted, knowing that any moment he'd arrive. Jack Martin, my husband. And then, as if I willed it by simply glaring in the doorway, he did. So her husband is a titan in the art world, Jack Martin, and she is sort of tired by 1985 of being his accessory. They've had a tumultuous marriage, and she should have probably, we could say that she should have probably known better, maybe. But it had always been a little bit that way. And so the way that the book sort of shapes is like she kind of tells you about this party and this argument they have at this party and his philandering. And then she kind of starts going back. She tells you the beginning of the end, and then she tells you the beginning of the beginning. But the beginning of the end takes place at this big retrospective, his third retrospective of his work in his lifetime, where she's been his kind of his accessory for the night. And they're at Berkeley, at the Berkeley Museum of Art, and he keeps trying to find her, to trot her around. And you know, she came to Iowa on Operation Peter Pan, which a lot of Cubans did. They were sent to the Midwest, to orphanages and foster homes after the Cuban Revolution, to sort of save them from the Soviets, these young children of Cuba. And then eventually the promise was that their parents would make their way. But mainly she spent the years from when she was 12 until she was in her 20s as an orphan without any family around. So he takes her around because he finds the story quite charming, because it really is like an intriguing bit of history that a lot of people don't know about, and she is upset by it, and so she sort of storms off into the restroom from one of these exchanges, and his art dealer walks in. And I think this tells you a lot. This scene tells you a lot about Anita. The door to the restroom opened, and it was Tilly carrying a drink. "Hi there," she said. "I thought you might need this." "Thank you." I set it on the counter while I reapplied my lipstick. "You look very fetching, Anita." She sounded sincere, and I was about to thank her when she added, "That dress was made for you. Is that a Dior?" "Halston," I said flatly. My antenna went up. Tilly knows a Halston from a fucking Dior. "Jack has a woman at Bergdorf who helps him pick things." "He's mentioned it to me," Tilly said. Tilly was what I learned wealthy white people called a handsome woman. Tall and lanky, but dressed in a way that was elegant. She was brilliant, absolutely the greatest champion her artist could have behind them, but ruthless. Was never a fan of mine. Well, at least not my work. She told me in her own polite way to my face, but as far as I'm concerned, to dislike my work is to dislike me. Unlike my husband, I don't separate the two. This is a big night for Jack, Tilly said, and he wanted you here by his side, wanted to be sure you look as gorgeous as possible, for you to be the one he introduced people to. Tilly, I picked up my purse and took a sip of my drink. Jack has a lot of big nights. I know because they take up a lot of mine. I'm trying to be a friend here, Anita, and what's your friendly advice? Just shut up and let him make my family history a prop in his one-man show? My advice is this. Choose. Lots of people come to New York to become things. Actresses, artists, singers, and they don't all have the talent to make it, but they also don't have your luck either. Excuse me, I said. I heard you saw my facial at Helena Rubinstein, Tilly replied. And it was true, I had. She was excellent. The personal shopper, those gorgeous earrings, getting to travel around the world with someone who finds you gorgeous and fascinating and doesn't mind at all that you're a bit abrasive, finds it challenging even. And what the fuck are you trying to say, Tilly? Lots of girls try to make it doing something really hard and fail. There's no shame in that, but most of them don't meet and seduce the most successful artists of a generation. Seduce, I said with a laugh, but I felt the vibrato in my voice, not the quavering tears, but of anger. I didn't move to New York to be a kept woman. I came to do my work. I was much shorter than Tilly, and she looked down at me now with such a patronizing gaze I wanted to slap her. Anita, she said, exasperated, the only reason you can't sit back and enjoy it, the only reason you bristle at how you're introduced and how Jack talks about your family or your history is because you're so intently caught up on being taken seriously as an artist. And I'm just telling you that you don't have to be. Jack doesn't care. Her words said with the clipped boarding school enunciation clawed and scratched at me like a feral cat, cloaked in the coup of gallery talk, the politeness of a museum powder room, but vicious. Made worse because I knew this wasn't conjecture. He had told her as much. He told her about the shopper and the facialist and that he didn't give a fuck if I was an artist or a housewife. But I care that I'm an artist, I said. A smile appeared on her face, one I remembered from when she looked at my portfolio. It was a smile doused in pity. I bit my tongue, resisted the urge because the truth of the matter is, she was just the messenger. An intervention based on what I could tell were many, many heartfelt conversations. I wanted to say, you puta, wait till you see what I do with my career now. I will not stop until you can't walk into a museum anywhere in this world without seeing a fucking Anita de Monte. I won't stop until they refer to Jack as Anita de Monte's boyfriend. Wait till I fucking show you. But instead I just said, well, thank you for the advice. And I walked out of the bathroom, slammed the rest of my drink, and got another. And then before I get to chat, a lot of this book was inspired by my own experience as an art history student in college in the 90s. And so the sort of second character in the book is Raquel, who is closing her junior year when we meet her and about to go into her senior year and going to work on her thesis. And so she's, this is how we meet Raquel in the spring of 1998. Raquel Toro walked into Professor Temple's light-filled office and for the first time did not feel herself shrink. She'd woken up that morning and, admittedly, after a night of 2-for-1 Cosmos with Mavette downtown, looked like shit. But she felt proud, ready to meet the day and John Temple unintimidated, neither by the mountains of books, catalogs, academic texts, tomes of criticism that he not only owned but had in least part authored, nor the exhibition posters lining the walls featuring shows he had mounted or had a major hand in. Today, Raquel walked in feeling worthy, not just of the company of his brilliance, but of her very place in this school. Before arriving at Brown, Raquel hadn't spent much time pondering what an Ivy League college would be like. She'd been too grateful for the opportunity to have expectations. But during her sophomore year, when John Temple called Raquel to his office hours for the first time, and she saw him behind his vast desk, she knew that this was it. This was what the Ivy League was all about. Wool blazers and expensive but understated watches, salt and pepper beards stroked for effect while holding court for enraptured students. The Ivy League was John Temple, whose name held no meaning to the average or even above average person, but whose work had the power to shape institutions, markets, and culture in the most erudite of forms. He was a man of great importance in the world, and in such proximity to that, despite the brilliantly drawn constellations he commended her on during his seminars, or her incisive yet accessible papers that he praised her for, she had always felt deeply insignificant, until today. I got the fellowship, she said, noting the confidence in her own voice. I'm going to be a curatorial fellow at the Contemporary Art Department this summer. John Temple's handsome face broke into a smile, revealing his perfect teeth. He pushed the Ames chair away from his desk to fully face her. Brava, Raquel, brava, though I had no doubt. She felt the flush coming up her neck and tried to contain her grin in a way that would seem less obviously delighted by his approval. Your recommendation put it over the top. Nonsense. It was a solid application across the board. It seems small that Risty Museum is a jewel box. Oh, I'm very aware. 3 of the fellows are from Harvard and Yale. Professor Temple looked impressed. He had, she then remembered, gone to Yale. Competitive field, even better. He smiled again, leaning in towards Raquel. A long way from selling sandwiches at the Met, huh? He said, pleased. She felt herself, her equalness evaporate. Quick and sudden, a red flush of shame replaced it, the kind that morphed fast into anger. Raquel simpered, fought hard to suppress it. What the fuck does that mean? They would have gotten it had he come with her this bullshit back home. She reminded herself that he couldn't have meant it as an insult, even if it felt that way. This was not Brooklyn, this was Brown. Here was a place of measured tones and intellectual rivalries. Here was not a place where necks were rolled, nor teeth sucked, nor fucks flung around willy-nilly. Here was not, he just reminded her, a place for girls who worked concessions at the Met, which wasn't even factually correct. He hadn't even remembered her story right. Oh, what do I take that? No, I think I'm okay.
All right.
Okay. Here. Oh, I can take that. Sorry.
I work here too. Thank
Okay.
you. All right, so it is a delight to be able to talk to you this evening. The book is wonderful, and I hope everybody in the audience will pick up a copy. I have many questions for you, but I also want to leave time for the room to ask questions. So we'll see how many of these we can get through.
Okay.
So a lot of them are, of course, about Anita Demonte Laughs Last,
Yes.
and then I've got a handful about your work more generally,
Okay.
including a question that was texted to me by a friend in Little Rock,
Oh, wow.
who's a tremendous fan of yours.
Oh, okay.
I promised her I would ask.
Okay.
And then some questions about your reading life and some stray questions about other things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Wow.
I know.
Okay, so let's start with some questions about the new novel.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I don't know that I've ever read a book that was so explicitly in argument with its own epigraph.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to ask you about that. So this epigraph is taken from the preface to the 5th edition of a book called History of Art Volume 2, published in 1994, written by Anthony F. Jansen.
Yeah.
And was the epigraph in place from the very beginning of the book?
No, it's so funny. My original epigraph was a Bjork lyric, and then it was going to be this Bjork lyric and this epigraph, but this didn't come to me till right when I finished the first draft. And a friend was very generous and let me come out to their house to write for a bit, and I brought all of my art history textbooks to make sure that my little references were correct. And I, for the first time ever, read the full preface to the introduction of my own freshman year art history textbook. And it was like, I don't know, like it just very much clicked into place. And then it did guide me on revision, if that makes sense. Like that was like, I found it right as I was finishing the first draft, but I think so much of this book really happened in revision.
That's interesting. So I had imagined that you had been arguing with this epigraph for decades.
I think that epigraph lived in my mind for
Ah.
decades.
Okay.
Like without knowing exactly what those words were, because I think I felt a real rage at the idea of what my very good, like my education was really good because it was a great liberal arts education. I could make an argument and write concisely. But I think when I think about how I got it, I really did walk away from 4 years of an Ivy League degree, sort of not having any conscientiousness that my own culture produced art worthy of study.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those of you who have not yet taken a look at the book, the epigraph is, why indeed should one not include artists who embody very different sensibilities from that of the European and the mainstream? There is, in principle, no reason to exclude them whatsoever. However, I have decided to limit this edition to Western art. I have taken a stand about what art I think is most significant, that not all readers will agree with, since it favors universality over ethnocentricity.
Yeah, in 1994, and that was my freshman year textbook in 1995.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's great. Like it's wild now, but that was the, we didn't need to read the preface. That was the tacit.
Uh-huh.
But it wasn't called The History of Western Art.
Yeah.
It was The History of Art.
Yes. Volume 2.
Volume 2, exactly. Yeah.
So on this subject, writers are often asked about the books that inspired their own. And I'm curious about that. very rarely is the question both about positive and negative inspirations.
Yeah.
And so I wondered if you would talk about the positive inspirations behind this book, and if you want to talk about any negative inspirations, I'd be curious to hear that too.
You know, I mean, in some funny way, maybe with the exception of Brandon Taylor's last book, but that was much more like kind of in the science, it's like a graduate student stuff. I suppose the negative inspiration was just that, and I'd actually read, oh my God, A Kind of an Ending, like, you know, when I was first starting out this process, just as a campus novel. Like, I think I hadn't felt like the campus novel had quite done this. Like, it's still with class and stuff, but it kind of had it done with, like, academic otherism, like, to some extent. And so maybe I would just say the campus novel genre, to some extent, in general, was sort of, like, the negative. But, like, I was really, really inspired by The Shining. Because, you know, there's sort of two dual relationship dramas, and I think of the relationship dramas as like the interpersonal manifestation of that epigraph to some extent. Like when you have been told that nothing that of yours is worth studying, what does that make you compromise in your relationships? Like, and so, but I think, you know, when I reread The Shining, like I just remember, I felt like there was so much sort of intense musing about marriage in that book that if you go back and you're not reading it as kind of a gothic horror and you're just reading it as a domestic novel, like it's like really intense in a really, really good way. And then I definitely owe a giant debt to The Hours. I felt like the idea of and an Indigo Girls song, Galileo, I don't know, like this idea of like somebody from another generation having impact and influence, and like their art having impact and influence, and like, and I think particularly I was influenced by the film version of that too. The cadence helped me kind of keep tight to my pace, I guess. Like, okay. Yeah.
So it won't surprise you to learn that
three white guys, yeah. It inspired this book. No, they helped. They helped. Yeah.
And two white women.
Yeah. No, completely.
Right.
That's
yes.
right. Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
So I'm sure it won't surprise you to learn that I'm curious about the supernatural elements inside of the book, and I know you must have realized that I was going to ask you about this.
I know.
So I would love to know how you determined a handful of things. First of all, the ghostly attributes that Anita would possess. And then also what shaped your vision of the afterworld and the saber tree.
Yeah, so I had outlined this before she was going to be in first person. Mm-hmm. I'd outlined it in third. It was all going to be in third. I wrote most of the first draft in third. And then a friend of mine who's a Cuban-American artist was like, you know, Anna Mendez's actual ghost lives behind the American Academy of Rome. And they must get such crazy requests because I just emailed them and they were like, you can come on May 6th, 7th, and 8th. And so I got on a flight to Rome and I went and I like sort of sat there and I was like, so I was like, how many using your story? It's like, and it was just in my mind, it was like, I don't know, like whatever happens, it was like, well, then you need to use my voice. And then I revised the entire book to first person. But then I hit a wall where I knew I needed to up the ante on the haunting. And I was about to go to, she was always going to haunt and there was going to be dreams and visions, you know, like, and that felt kind of normal. Mm-hmm. And then I knew once she actually died, I'm like, well, what happens? And I was about to go to Cuba because I felt that was important to go back and know. Because I'd been here, it felt important to then know where, like, what the difference was in a more intense way. And so I started reading a lot of Taino mythology, and I started reading, they're called batakis, which is like part of Santeria. It's like kind of Santeria, like folk, like, I don't know, like allegories, I guess. Like, and the saber tree was considered to be the pathway in Taino culture and also in Santeria from this world to the afterlife. And then the bat was considered to be like sort of how people could come and visit you.
Okay. From
one world to the other. And so it felt actually quite organic. And then I just had to come up with the rules that I learned from reading in your class. Like I was like, well, then there have to be some rules, right? Like of this world. Like it can't just be boundless. Like, you know, there've got to be some rules. And so it was like, I was like, well, not everybody can be a bat. Like artists and muses can be bats. and then how do they get power, and how do they become bigger and fatter bats, and like there's one big fat bat named Ricardo that she finds. He's like a blowhard, and he lives in her tree, and he sort of explains to her why it's working and it's not working, and so like I think it was like it then the rules for the fake world, the mystical world, sort of then informed the plot in some funny way. Like, that informed the plot of what was happening in the real world. Like, I was like, well, then there's the issue. Is like, now she can't come back. Like, she can come back, and then suddenly she can't, and now she feels, and then what happens when all the fun of death is gone? Like in a weird way.
That's my question.
I know. I think of them as like two coming of age stories. Like Raquel is coming of age in like college in like a normal way, and like Anita's kind of coming of age in death and trying to find some peace in death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So Anita is inspired by Ana Mendieta.
Yes.
We are fattening the bat of Ana Mendieta.
Yes. Oh
by
my God,
talking
she's
about
giant
her
now.
today.
Yeah.
All right. So I have a very sparse background when it comes to the art world.
Yeah.
So I did not realize when I read the book for the first time that it was patterned after actual relationships.
Yeah.
Anita after Ana Mendieta and Jack Martin after Carl Andre.
Yeah.
So how faithful were you to the actual facts of their biographies, and how did you depart from them?
So, I was pretty faithful to the events of the crime, like minus the part, like the book opens at a party, and like that happens the night that she dies, and I don't know, I just couldn't get my head around that, them not being at a party. Like, I think there's something about watching couples and crowds that's fascinating, and so I was pretty close about the crime. I wanted, the problem with nonfiction, and I know this because of my other gig, is like, there's fact checkers and legal and all these things, and so you can never just lay out the evidence. You always be like, and allegedly, and some people say, and blah blah blah, and I was like, but what would it have felt like? What did it just feel like? And I just wanted to empower this person that had died by a violence to have some agency beyond that violence. And fiction felt the only way, but I felt I had to stay decently close. Like there were but like the only thing that I did do to try to allow Anita de Monte to become Anita de Monte was I researched the book in like 2020, and then from that perspective, and then I didn't look at that research again ever. And I just wrote it from memory. Yeah. It's like I'm sure I made little notes, but like I didn't go back and be like, what did they do? But like the weird things stick in with your mind. Like in one account that was in like the Village Voice or something, like they were watching a movie the night that she dies, or he's watching a movie the night she dies, and I'm pretty, like that was the movie. But like it just stuck in my head because I'd seen it. It's a Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn movie. Like, and I just was like, I have to keep, like, I think I just wanted to get as close with some of those details of the crime as I could to implicate somebody who has never been forcibly that implicated, and the people around them too, because like it takes a lot of people to like let somebody sort of never have to deal with something. Yeah.
So oddly enough, for me, the most disturbing moment of brutality you depicted was not Anita's murder. It was something that happened to Raquel. Yeah. And I don't, this is fairly late in the book, so I don't know if you'll want to talk about it. It might be a spoiler. It's something with a pair of scissors. And I wondered if you want to talk about that, or should we leave that for readers to discover on their own?
Maybe we'll let people discover that. It's one of the only things I don't like to talk
it's
about.
Sure,
too much.
It's when I say something happens with a pair of scissors, it's probably not what is coming to mind. But nonetheless, like it really got to me. Yeah. So let me ask you. Let me ask you my friend's question. So this is why I'm rude enough to have brought my phone.
No,
in
it's
front
okay.
Of the room. Okay. So, all right. So, you are a friend from home regards you as her favorite of all the writers who have ever studied with me. And there are a lot of very fine writers in that catalog.
Very fine.
And in fact, I'm going to have you sign a copy of Olga for her before we take off. But she wanted me to ask you a question specifically about Olga Dies Dreaming, and she shared a passage with me and asked, "Will you read this?" And ask for a response to it.
Okay.
All right, so this is from Olga Dies Dreaming. I need to take off my glasses to make it out. All right. Make no mistake, but the star of the show was her brother, whom Olga had always envied for his ability, when with his donors or on television, to transform into a person who was white palatable while still remaining very much himself. He wasn't quite code switching so much as he managed miraculously to speak several languages simultaneously, creating a linguistic creole of hip-hop, academia, contemporary slang, and high-level policy points that made Olga marvel. More astounding, he knew exactly when and with whom to finesse which aspect of himself, which proved, as Olga observed her brother, remarkably counterintuitive. He gave one of his older white male supporters a fist tap and slapped his back, and as he walked away, Olga heard the man tell his wife that Prieto could be the Latino Obama. He called the hostess of the event Ma, which Olga was certain would offend, if not confuse her, but instead she blushed and kissed his cheek. Yet he was deft enough to know that when greeting two of his older black supporters, Prieto's events almost always brought out moneyed people of color, to call them sir and ma'am, and ask after their children, which inevitably led to the retrieval of a phone and remarkably a FaceTime call to their adult children traveling out of state. All right, so the question that I was asked to present to you was the very simple one that writers get all the time. Have you known somebody like Olga's brother? Was this modeled after somebody, or was this invented by you?
I mean, he's the most invented thing in all of Olga.
Okay.
Like, I had done, when I was a wedding planner, like a couple weddings for some New York politicians. And then, there's one part that was that was completely modeled after Hakeem Jeffries, because, I watched him go from every, small rinky-dink office to who he is now, and he would always work at the train station that I would go to for my job. And, but I think it was, a lifetime of sort of, I don't know that, Olga could never do that way. I think, it's a male thing, where you can more easily slip in and out, and you realize what people might need from you and be able to give it to them, and so I think it was an amalgam of kind of having been around very successful men of color, Latino men, and watching how it feels easier for them. After a couple of generations of moving in these spaces. And he's so many people. I remember I was my first Latina senior class president, and I remember my co-president was the second black male president, and I remember us going to these things, and I just felt so stiff, and he just knew what everybody wanted. It was so interesting.
Brown
or
high
high
school?
Brown, yeah,
Okay.
but it was 21, and I just remember, it felt so easy, and I felt, so self-conscious, am I being fake? Am I not being fake? I'm and it was, I don't know, there's, a way of, fear, of, I don't know, second-guessing that sometimes I think, especially younger women do. So, I don't know, he's completely fictional, but he's, 100 guys. He's no guy, and he's 100 guys. Yeah.
All right.
He's my favorite character though, because he's my true baby. No, really. I think about him all the time. He's my true little baby, and I always feel sad for the sad parts of his life and happy for the happy parts of his life. Yeah.
So I've got I've got a number of fairly trivial questions, but among them is I notice a pattern with the titles, which is that Anita de Monte Laughs Last,
Yeah.
Olga Dies Dreaming, they're both complete sentences. And,
Yeah.
and I mean, they have other things in common as well. So is this a deliberate pattern? Is it going to continue?
Oh my God! I sent this into my agent is here. I sent this into my publisher with a one-word title called Legacies, because I'd gone around for 2 years saying Olga Dies Dreaming, and then she was like, I don't know, I feel like we need something else with the name, and then I ended up coming up with this. I don't, and then I just realized, I kind of know what the third title is, and it's also a complete sentence. I wish, I wish I could come up with shorter titles. No, and actually, I want to say my publisher said that title is great, but it sounds like a nonfiction book. And then there's a nonfiction book. It was going to be Legacies, and there is a nonfiction book that's coming out this year called Legacies. So she was right. She's got great instincts, but it is it is awkward when you're in an Uber and they're like, "What's your book?" And you're like, "Her name's Anita," and she laughs. So, but yeah, I wish that I could do a shorter job. Yeah.
This was not a complaint.
No,
it was just
no.
an observation and a question. So I read somewhere that I stumbled across the fact that you're skilled at reading tarot.
Yes.
Right. So I asked a tarot app how tonight's event would go.
Oh, what did it say?
It said Ace of Cups.
Oh, that's
good,
pretty great.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty nice.
So
Yeah.
have you ever incorporated tarot into your practice, into your writing practice, or any other such similar
I've done
devices?
tarot for characters.
Uh-huh.
Like, I've done tarot for characters. I've done, like, a little astrology for characters. Like, but, no. I mean, like, a little bit. Like, in terms of, like, what's their outlook about this thing? Like, really, really early on. But, like, I do find it kind of, it guides me a lot. Like, in just, I don't know, the instinctual choices beyond the creative page that, like, we have to make, about, you know, leading towards a title or, like, you know, king something. But, like, I think in general, like, just very, like, in the very earliest stages, I do use it. Yeah, I do use it a little bit. But mainly to give me a sense of, like, what, it's really early, because it's like, would I map them this way, would I map them that way, kind of thing. Yeah. Direction. I try to treat them like people.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I think about what their birthday would be. Like Olga's a Scorpio.
Huh.
You know, like, yeah, like Anita's a Scorpio in my mind. Like, yeah.
Are you a Scorpio?
No,
Okay.
Raquel's a Virgo. Yeah.
So after I graduated from Iowa, and every time I leave a teaching semester here, what I miss the most is being able to talk with people about reading.
Yeah.
Like, I'm always curious about people's reading backgrounds and their reading lives, and so I've got a handful of quick questions about your reading life.
Okay.
Well, I wondered, what was the book you loved best when you were a child, at say 10 years old?
Oh, I was obsessed with Anne of Green Gables.
Okay.
Obsessed. Yeah, I still have the copy that I, like, stole from the Brooklyn Public Library, which is terrible. Like, I should give it back. It's falling apart. It's a paperback. I know, it's too late now. They don't want it.
They're going to give you a prize?
Yeah, and
That
I
would
should
have
give
been
them
the
back the book.
opportunity, right? Shameful.
I know, very, 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 very shameful. I couldn't give it back. I loved it.
As
Yeah.
an adult, which book have you reread more often than any other?
Oh, you know, I probably reread 100 Years of Solitude the most.
So beautiful.
But, like, I've read Beloved a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I'm, like, surprised at how much I've read. But, like, sometimes you don't mean to keep reading Beloved, but you can't. Like, you're like, let me just pick it up for this little piece, and then the next thing you know, you're all the way through Beloved again. Like, so, like, I've read Beloved a lot, actually. Yeah. And, like, but, yeah, 100 Years of Solitude, it's amazing how much I've read it. Like, yeah, and I, like, now I've tried to get through it in Spanish, like, which is harder, but,
Yeah.
like, you know, also kind of rewarding in its own way.
Have you picked up the posthumous Marquez?
No, not yet. Like, I just, I'm, like, behind on giving friends from Iowa notes. Yeah.
In your personal library, which writer is represented by the most books?
Oh, gosh. Hold on, I'm just picturing the shelves. I have a lot of Anna Castillo. I have a lot of Ian McEwan.
Okay.
I have a lot of Ian McEwan. I love Ian McEwan. And I have a lot of John Irving, who is, like, my kind of teen crush of writers.
Yeah.
Like, I had a major teen crush on John Irving. I just read John Irving all day and all night. But I keep them all. Yeah.
So my favorite John Irving anecdote was shared by Connie Brothers, who said that, like, when he was a teacher here,
Yeah.
He had not yet had his big breakthrough with The World According to Garp. And didn't understand why he wasn't famous.
Yeah.
And then he wrote The World According to Garp, and
Yeah.
suddenly everybody was reading him, and he was famous, and he was so happy.
Wait, but you know what's really funny, Kevin, is, like, I'm actually just thinking about it, and the only thing about my library is, like, I give things away when I really like them.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I have books that I love that, like, I'm just thinking, like, I can't keep my hands on them.
Yeah.
Does that, like, yeah, like I have given away almost every Samantha Hunt book I've ever owned.
I have,
Like,
do you purchase them again and again?
I keep buying them and then I keep giving them away. I love her books, like, but I'm always like, you've got to read this book. Like,
I
yeah.
keep giving away The Baron and the Trees by
Yeah.
Ettore Calvino. And then there's an album that I must have bought literally, I think, 41 copies of.
Oh my
Given
God.
away to people over the years.
Oh my, well, now I'm that way. I'm obsessed now with Open Throat.
Uh-huh.
I'm obsessed with it, and I think, I don't even know, I've lost track of how many copies of Open Throat I've gotten and now given away.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm obsessed.
I have not. I know all about it, but I haven't read
Love
it
it.
yet, so I'll pick it up.
Obsessed. Like, yeah, that was, oh my gosh, the other book that I've given away a million times, like in the last years, is When I Sing Mountains Dance.
Uh-huh.
It's amazing.
Okay.
I think you would really like it if you haven't read it.
Who's the author?
It's Irene Sula.
Okay. You might have just answered this next question about books, but is there a book that immediately makes you think of other people as a friend when they name it as one of their favorites?
Oh.
Or an enemy?
Or oh, actually, no. Whenever I don't know that I think of it as a compliment necessarily, but whenever I hear The Alchemist, I think of my college freshman roommate. Like, but she like gave them all to us for graduation. Like, anyway, like, yes, I always think of her that way. But I did reread it recently, and it was actually very delightful. It was
That's
delightful in a
interesting.
way that it wasn't when I was young.
Okay. You're still friends? Are you still friends with that roommate?
We are still really good friends, though I think if I write one more book, we won't be, because if I tell the story about how I stopped writing because when I got to my dorm room, she was the 17 Magazine Fiction Writer Contest, like, one more time in public, I think she'll stop talking to me.
All right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're a lifelong, and I mean, you spent time at Brown, but
Yeah.
you've
I'm
been a
a lifelong
Brooklynite.
reader, yeah,
You've been a
yeah.
Brooklynite all your life.
Yeah.
And you're dedicated to Brooklyn. So I'm wondering what your experience of Iowa City was like, both the community and the workshop. I'm also wondering if you've kept up your driving.
Oh, I never learned to drive.
You didn't? I thought you learned
No,
going to learn
no.
while you were here.
I thought I was so determined that I would, and then it was COVID,
Oh,
and then
okay.
like I didn't. I loved. Well, I still have some friends in the workshop that are here. It was so cozy. That's what we were just talking about. And I was actually in LA with a couple of friends from the workshop. I was with Abigail, Belinda. Like, just it was so cozy, and I'm sometimes surprised at how many friends I kept. And it was like, I think I ended up being like a real hostess because it felt the most like normal for me. Like, I didn't love the food as much, but it was okay. I don't know, it was fun. It was like it was a lot of fun, but it was definitely a culture shock, you know, like, but I think it was like, it made me excited to write because it was very quiet. To me, it was very quiet, you know, like, even though I lived between kind of two bars, I felt like I would miss home and then I would write it because I was working on Olga for the most part when I was here. But like, there was just something, I don't know. I love the talent show. I just loved being in I loved being in grad school here. It was just like a fun, I didn't have as much fun in college because I think I was so self-conscious and so stressed out that I wasn't going to like make it. And I don't know. And I was so burdened by the debt and all these things. And so like, it was just kind of like a good time, you know, like I went to Hawkeye, like it was like a great time, like it was a little COVID-y, so it was, you know, I had like 1.5 normal semesters, and then it was kind of, but even then, like we were just talking about this, we'd hang out on my front porch after workshop, like there was a very sweet time to it, like, I don't know, I have a very fond memory.
I'm glad,
yeah.
of course. So I ran across, speaking of Iowa City food,
Yeah.
like I ran across like some magazine that had a piece about the best pizza cities in the United States.
Yeah.
In Iowa City, they ranked number 7.
Really?
Where did this data come from?
Where's the pizza from? Where's the pizza from? No, I never ate as many fried chicken and burgers as I did because John, now they don't have it, John's fried chicken and Georgie's burgers were like my 2 favorite things here. But like, and I would go like, yeah, it was like, I guess St. Bert's probably just opened when I got here, and like then I would go on Sundays and have a martini and feel like, you know, because I came when I was 42, so I felt like that would be my adult day. Yeah, it was my adult day, and I'd go and I'd have a martini and chit chat with somebody that was like another older person at the bar, and it was fun.
So the book is dedicated, in addition to Ana Mendieta,
Yeah.
it's dedicated to your Aunt Linda and your grandparents.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you'd mind telling us a little about these people.
Well, my aunt passed away like right as we were about to go to print, and I went to her wake, and like, I don't know, my aunt was my whole family were kind of very reserved. You know, my mom, I didn't live with my mom, I lived with my grandparents. And so, and my aunt's whole book club that like was like basically her closest friend group, like just could not stop gushing over how much it meant to her that I'd written a book. Mm-hmm. And she wasn't that effusive in real life. And I think I kind of like, literally I panicked and I was like, I have to add this. I was like, I feel terrible. Like, I was like, I must add this. But she was such an avid reader, and we would always talk about books. And my grandparents were actually really avid readers. I don't think anybody connected the, like, honestly, I think this is the craziest, my family thinks it's the craziest thing in the world. Like, they can't, my uncle, I was to my uncle the other day, my aunt's widow, I was like, they have like they have a goddaughter who's now like a fully grown woman. I was like, Betsy showed up at my Philadelphia event at the little free library, and he was like, did she know you were gonna be there? And I was like, yeah, no, she like came over. She just like wandered to the library. Still like sent me a message, and he was like, somebody's talking about your book in the Washington Post. Like, it's like they still like can't wrap their heads around it. And certainly, if my grandparents would have been alive, they wouldn't have been able to wrap their heads around it either. But like, I do think they would have been very proud. And I just, anyway, it felt important that I got to like have her in there.
That is sweet. Okay. So I have a handful of other questions, but I will use them to fill in the silences if there are any. But let's turn it over to the audience.
You can just raise your hand if you want to ask a question, please.
Hi. I really loved your book.
Thank you.
I just finished it yesterday.
Oh, yay.
I was interested that there were chapters in here that were from the perspective of Jack.
Oh, yeah.
And I felt every time I turned the page and I saw another chapter by him, I was just mad because I didn't want to read from his point of view, and I didn't want another chapter of like his mental gymnastics about how he was really a good guy and like the love against him. Was that kind of the point of putting some of the story through his point of view, just to kind of anger the reader? I felt so angry when I read this chapter.
No, I mean, I see how that would be the reaction. I think it was more, I think I did this a little bit in Olga too. Like, I think it's like important to sort of look how power really functions. And I guess I could have just had this omniscient ghost, but I think I was much more interested in, I took a lot of acting when I was in high school, and I like really good teachers, and like one of them was like, no villain wakes up and starts twisting their mustache and thinking that they're a villain, and so I think I was more interested in the way in which like he was doing the mental gymnastics and how that then justifies the things that he asked to do, and what the perspective is of the people around him, like particularly Tilly, and what's at stake for her, and sort of like how does power get deployed. And I just didn't think I could get as close to it the other way. And I also sort of, I did a lot of research. If anybody here is doing a PhD in sociology, I read your papers. Like, no, I do. I read a lot of sociology dissertations about abusive partners and like their patterns of behavior and like thought patterns and so, and I think some of that was like, I don't want to just say interested. I thought it felt important to not just, again, like, I think it's so often we're so obsessed with true crime. It's like, this person was murdered. And then it's just like a sentence, and it doesn't like mean the things anymore. And I think it, like, without getting in there, I felt like you couldn't make it feel the things. Yeah. But I get it. Made you mad. Yeah. You felt the things.
I felt the things.
Oh.
I think your art history guy, Jansen, might have started out here. Is that right?
Oh, maybe.
Well, more to the point, do you have a favorite source of information about Anam, Indiana?
Oh, well, originally I had already like a lot of the Olga Viso catalogs. Like she's probably done the most of the academic work on her, but the book that probably shifted the way that I even thought about the basis of the character was actually this. It was an academic book, but it was called Anita and the Black Atlantic, and it was much more like situating her less as like a solo artist and like a Latino artist, and more about like her journey and the ways in which it was informed by the Caribbean. And a lot of like kind of the book, you don't need to know it to like enjoy the book, but like a lot of it has the threads of like kind of just pan-Caribbean mythology and belief system in there. And so something about that book really cracked open for me the idea of how to think about it, if that makes sense. And there's like a current in the characters, like Raquel's a descendant from Puerto Rico, and then there's like another character who's Dominican, and there's like a lot about sort of like limpias and santeria, but like it was sort of connected through this like Caribbeanness that felt kind of important to me for this story. Yeah, and that academic text really like did it for me. That's a good question. Thank you. Anybody else?
So the novel stretches across more than 20 years,
Oh, yeah.
1978 to 2000. And there are various cues. I mean, first the chapter headings tell us when we are. But also there are musical cues, there are art world cues. I was wondering if there are linguistic cues, verbal cues, and what your tricks were for kind of delineating what time was what.
Oh my gosh, the verbal tricks were the hardest because slang changes so much. And so I use my diaries a lot. Like, luckily I've always been a journaler. And that helped a lot. And then I rely a lot on period magazines. And maybe I have a secret pleasure in having the excuse of going on eBay and buying old magazines. And I find, so I did a lot. I bought a lot of old, hip hop magazines, but, was very specific about kind of the years and the seasons. And I bought a lot of old art world magazines, Art in America and stuff like that, just to sort of, I wanted to make sure that my assessment was correct and not. And the most disturbing was actually I bought a lot of women's magazines from the 90s, and I sent a message to a group text and was like, I can't believe we survived. It was oh my gosh, so many more things should be wrong with all of us. It was really when you read them in such so one right after the other, it's what a mess. But so I think that was probably the hardest. For the linguistics was the hardest, because I think sometimes you think you said something then and you're like, actually that was 5 years later that was popular. The music was also weirdly challenging because you don't want to purely stay top 10.
Sure.
Or even top 40. And so I kind of really dug. There have been a lot of trial subscriptions to Billboard magazine that got canceled after I dug through the archives. So yeah. But that felt really important. But the Paul Simon thing was pure coincidence, because I was that feels like the perfect thing, and then I was oh, it's the right time too. And it just the way that I think it's hard. The one thing that was good was just remember the ubiquitousness of certain things that doesn't exist anymore, right? It's when you had radio and you didn't have nearly as much variety. It's everybody knew Graceland.
Yes.
Everybody knew that Monica and Brandy song, because it was just everywhere, and so there were a few things that felt total touch points. That was fun. The radio station was a lot of fun for me.
Do you have a background?
Oh, I mean, yeah, that part is totally true. Brown had basically 6 days a week was an indie pop station, an indie rock station, and then on the 7th day it was all just kind of hip hop and R&B and jazz, and it was called 360 Degrees Black Experience and Sound, and my friend was inspired Marcus the Mac, and I would go and kind of help him out with picking things and stuff, and so that was one of my most treasured experiences and spaces. Yeah,
it's beautiful to be able to occupy that space with you.
Yeah.
In a living book. Yes.
So I loved Raquel.
Thanks.
There's a mic coming your way right now. There we go.
I loved the character Raquel, and I thought you were pretty generous with her boyfriend towards the end of things, and I thought that was a very sensitive way of dealing with that sort of relationship that you always wanted her to end.
Yeah.
Before she did.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to remember they're just kids, right? Like, and I think at one point, without giving away too much, like Anita's ghost story intertwines with Raquel's real story. And so you see some of Raquel's life through Anita's eyes. And she says at one point, she's like, you know, they're having a fight in the middle of the street, which, you know, I mean, you only do when you're like, well, maybe that's not true, but you certainly do more when you're 20. And then at later ages, and she's like, and he starts to like cry, and she's like, he's just a boy. And you're like, he is just a boy, and he's navigating things. It's just, to her, he seems so sophisticated. But in that one moment, I think you're like, oh, he's just this kid. You know, his parents have kind of told him what to do his whole life. And so I think I wanted to have some kindness that he's also still in progress. He's not the person we care about, but, like, he's still in progress. And I think, like, you know, I don't know. I hope that he's, like, this... I hope he grew up into be a lovely person that's quite thoughtful and like learned a lot from this experience. You know? And I think there's something about the end that makes me hope that. Right. Yeah. Yeah. He's kind of caddish, but like, you know, actually, a funny thing, I called the hottest guy in my class at Brown in order to like, that's actually, I was like, I was like, hey, Josh, can you talk to me? Like, he made sure that he was like, please don't put me in the acknowledgments. But I was like, hey, Josh, I was like, can you talk to me about what it's like to be the hottest guy and like Brown? And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think I was particularly good looking. And he married his girlfriend from his senior year. And in the background, she was like, you get away with everything because you're hot. And then he was like, I'm going to call you back when I'm walking the dog. But you know, I think, like, and it was, like, kind of hilarious because I was like, but what about, like, I don't know why I remembered every woman whose heart he broke during college. And so he's like, you know, I just felt like, you know, I was like, I just liked them all and they were all so nice. And then I was like, well, this person thought this and this person thought that. And he was just like, oh. Like, you know, like, he just so saw it really differently. And so I think that conversation was really illuminating to me when I was thinking about this character. Yeah. Josh.
Why did he marry his? Why did he marry his son?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Are there other questions from the room? All right, so, how does the Brown in the novel resemble or differ from the Brown that you experienced?
Well, I think despite being able to put in the supernatural, I had an absolute inability to imagine another college. I was so, you know, Brown is actually quite unique in the sense that there is an art school, right? It's on a hill, and then there's an art school sort of like right on the same hill, and so it just contributed to such a unique culture, especially if you were in the arts, so to speak. There's a real scene, as it were, and I tried to make it anonymous, and then it felt like I was being cheeky, you know, like writing around it being Brown and anybody. And Providence is just such a very specific but picturesque city to me, and I just sort of, I don't know. Then it became kind of fun to write Providence. I loved writing Providence. It was like a lot. It was a lot of fun. It's a favorite space for me. So it was pretty accurate. Like, I've had friends that were there. I'd say friends of color that were there that were like, oh, that was it. And then my freshman roommate, who was not, she was kind of, you know, white and upper middle class, she texted me when she finished it, and she was like, I didn't realize we had such different experiences. But, you know, I'm excited to I'm going to talk with some students there about it, because I think it's very different now. Like, I think just the whole landscape has changed so much in 25. I have my 25th reunion, like, in a couple of months, so that'll be fun, or not. But I think it's changed, you know, a lot. In some ways, it's changed a lot. Ironically, of course, like, you know, a big thing of this is, like, she's so, she's made to feel and then does feel, Raquel, a lot of feelings about affirmative action, and it's like this hovering presence that's inserted into her life, and that, you know, she's trying to kind of toss off. And so obviously I didn't realize what was going to happen and transpire, but you know, I think a part of it is like that was of the time, because it was still sort of a relatively, diversity was new. As I said, it was a time where we were invited to dinner but not given forks and knives to have the meal. So I think it's not like that now, but I do think it's pretty accurate to the ways in which that kind of transpired. Yeah.
We could do maybe one more question.
So, I mean, when I was rereading the book, one of my notes, I thought this was going to seem totally random, but it came up in the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Ask about bats.
Oh, yeah.
Bats are an important feature of
Yeah.
the book. And the dye house is known to have attracted bats in
Yes.
its day. I wondered whether you encountered the dye house bats, whether you've had encounters with bats elsewhere in
I
your life.
didn't encounter the
Okay.
dye house bats, but my upstairs neighbor got a bat in very early on in the chimney flue, and it was like such pure chaos, and it just like the whole little building, it was only like 6 units, was just like woken in the night, and I think the idea of this tiny chaos agent just felt mischievous, but then also really fright. They loom larger for us bats than they are, actually. They're actually usually pretty small. But so I think there was something, I don't think I would have even, the appeal of the bat probably wouldn't have happened had it not been for here. There was something about the bat where it's not supposed to be that I got experience with here that was bizarrely very disruptive. I could totally imagine having then a lifelong fear of bats after one encounter, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's a delightful book. I hope everybody will pick it up. Thank you so much for coming to
Thank
Iowa City and
you.
conversing with me.
Oh, thank you for
Let's
reading
have
so
another round of
closely.
applause.